BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. So, it's still morning now. Had a whole lot of coffee today, so I'm a little bit hyped up. And I came across something here that I would just like to read with you guys. Bipartisan legislation has a better chance of succeeding over the long term. When Congress is able to reach policy agreements with both sides participating, Democrats and Republicans alike, they are more invested in ensuring that a bill passes the test of time. Obamacare is a perfect example. That law that passed on a party line vote, and ever since the Republicans have fought tooth and nail to get rid of it. Sort of talking about some things like, okay, Obamacare passed, and they go on to say that, well, why do we have an opioid crisis? Well, the other side blames Obamacare. Why do we have a failing economy? Well, the other side blames Obamacare. Why aren't we getting the results that we want? They will always blame Obamacare. Healthcare represents 1/6 of the U.S. economy, and if that segment of our economy were its own country, it would be one of the largest in the world. And something like healthcare should not necessarily be approached from a partisan standpoint. And this was very relevant to 2019 and going on to the general election in 2020, because Medicare for All is one of the most heavily talked about things. And that is, sadly, it's a partisan healthcare plan. Now, one of the things, though, that we just need to talk about is unity, common ground. I do not believe for a second that partisanship is the answer to anything. I've heard some very good arguments for Medicare for All, very convincing ones too. But it's almost just like, if we aren't working together, then it's not going to happen. No healthcare plan is going to happen. Whether it's the Medicare for All plan that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are talking about, authored by Bernie Sanders, that's definitely something that he came up with and then Elizabeth Warren signed on later, right? Or even if it's what the Republicans want, just their free market approach to healthcare that they've talked about for ages. But it's like, you really just have to see that the thing that we need more than anything else in the United States of America is unity. And I'm really just kind of sick and tired of hearing these things about playing the opposition, just being the counter response. There are just some things that we're going to have to accept. One humanity, one people, one America, one earth, one love, just one everything. And this is the stuff that you may perhaps hear from somebody like Marianne Williamson. And I think that her presence in the 2020 primary, we're not at the general yet, the 2020 primary, is incredibly valuable, because we just have to sort of recognize that until we kind of entertain that politics of love, we will never be able to solve these questions about how do we improve healthcare in the United States of America. This book that I was just reading from is actually The Right Answer by John Delaney, one of the most hated politicians in the United States of America. I mean, people are just constantly trolling him on social media, telling him to drop out. Never mind that if someone is actually at the level of where John Delaney is, they hire people to do their own social media so he doesn't see any of it. I mean, that kind of goes without saying, but it should, and it's also, if any presidential candidate listened to online trolls, well, we would be in a very different world. Now, it's like John Delaney, of course, does not support Medicare for All, but what he talks about is bipartisanship. And kind of the thesis of this chapter that I was just reading is saying that we're never going to have a solid answer on healthcare until we sort of have healthcare as a bipartisan piece of legislation. And guess what? I've heard the exact same thing from the conservative Republicans. They were just sort of saying something that's also mentioned, like, why didn't they rewrite Obamacare with the parts that everybody agreed with? Like, go through Obamacare, find the things that the Republicans and the Democrats agree with, and let's rewrite the bill. I mean, the whole thing about repeal and replace. Let's keep the things that are working, and then maybe there's something that could be improved upon. But conservative Republicans also talked about creating healthcare in a bipartisan way. The AHCA, the American Health Care Act, the thing with Tom MacArthur from New Jersey, that was not the right answer, because all he did was just cut things off, not find the things that were working. And like Sean Spicer, I think, was the press secretary at the time. He's like, well, it's shorter. I mean, it's not as big as Obamacare. He said something to that effect. And, find the specific things that were working and then perhaps come at it in somewhat of a bipartisan manner. And it's not to say that I endorse John Delaney's healthcare plan, which is called Better Care. I mean, I can't say that right now. But what I think is greatly lacking from the American political conversation is just this pure form of unity that we need to embrace. And bipartisanship exists with things like infrastructure. Absolutely. I mean, people need bridges, right? People need tunnels. People need roads to drive on. Those things. It can often be done. Infrastructure is said to be the most bipartisan thing that we have in our government. But when you're going to be looking at something about just the way that we view this stuff on the evening news, the shouting between Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, and leftists versus right-wingers, you really just sort of see that the conversation is being bogged down with an excessive form of tribalism, and it will never happen. I mean, we'll never get the answers that we genuinely want, improving healthcare, economic prosperity, improving the overall standard of living for everybody, if we're coming at it in a partisan way, and in an extreme partisan manner. Now, some of the things, though, that we got to talk about, if we're going to mention a guy like Delaney, a lot of people are just like, he's just using his own money to run for president. What about Tom Steyer? He's just using his own money to run for president. What about Mike Bloomberg? He's just using his own money to run for president. Is that acceptable? And in our current day and age, in our current legal framework, yes, you can have something like that. You can have a person funding themselves. But it was Marianne Williamson as well who stood up and said that there should be no private funds that are involved with politics. Like when people are kind of on the campaign trail, they should not be using private funds. They should only be using public funds. I mean, as far as I recall, she said something to that effect. And as of this point, I almost just completely agree, because then it's just going to turn into what Russell Brand was talking about, how elections can be over before they start. Just find out who has the most money and who has the most connections. That could be at least a step in the right direction. And I mean, I guarantee you that Tom Steyer would not have been on the debate stage if he hadn't spent, $300 million or something like that to try and get to that level, running all these countless ads around the D.C. area. I mean, he wouldn't have been there. And Mike Bloomberg has a net worth of $54 billion, perhaps the wealthiest candidate to ever run for president. Does that mean that he's instantly going to win the nomination? I think Russell Brand's statement is a little bit too extreme, because first and foremost it depends on how much Mike Bloomberg is spending. But also, you got to look at guys like Bloomberg and Steyer and Delaney. Have they neglected the Senate? Have they forgotten about the House of Representatives? Even though I just read something from John Delaney's book that I actually thought was an interesting idea, I have to admit, though, it's time for him to drop out of the race, if you were to look at this from just a purely theoretical standpoint. Because it's not only about the presidency, it's also about the House of Representatives and the Senate. And John Delaney was a 3-term member of the House of Representatives representing Maryland in the 6th Congressional District. Now, what he should do is, he should go back to Maryland. I mean, beat him with a whip. Yeah, John Delaney, get back to Maryland. This is what you should do. No, but it's just an idea. It's like, go back to Maryland and try to reclaim one of the House seats that has been taken by a Republican. And it's not to say that I'm some passionate Democrat. I'm not even a member of the Democratic Party, because partisanship, once again, is something that is just really bogging down all conversations in America, and it's a form of excessive tribalism. But you got to look at this also from things that you want, that you're passionate about, things like ideals, as well as things like strategy. And we've used the metaphor on this channel before, playing the game of chess, and you're the person who is just watching 2 other people play chess, and you're like, oh, this side could move this way and this side could move that way. Well, that's what's going on. Delaney should be running in the House of Representatives to try and reclaim one of those seats. Why not? The Democrats would want more House seats. Is there anybody who would say that the Democrats need less House seats? Well, other than the Republican Party, of course. But some people even go as far to say that they would disagree with Marianne Williamson's statement that we shouldn't have public funds for... We shouldn't have private funding for the candidates. We shouldn't have public funding for the candidates. Some people are just like, candidates can organize on social media. Candidates can organize with the internet and platforms and teleconferencing. There's no reason to pour this enormous amount of money into running things the way that they do. It's like, if you just sort of just want to be like, candidates can organize their things on social media, you shouldn't even be spending money on these things. I know that that's an extreme statement, and I know that's something that we can't exactly just throw into action right now, but you got to look at where it's coming from. What it's sort of saying is just money involved with politics is, well, putrid. Money involved with politics is just rigging the system. That's just the private sector moving the public sector to its advantage. And we talked about that during the Karl Marx upload, just about how some people see this as something in the 21st century. Like, it comes from Das Kapital, the rich will get richer and then they will run away with it. And I'm not a Marxist as well, because we did that whole upload, talking about some sketchy things about Karl Marx, but that's just one idea. That's just like one sentence that someone has talked about that actually seemed like it contained a certain amount of insight. But what happens is, though, when we have this partisan dynamic, is that we really miss out on the concepts of humanity. We all know what we're supposed to be doing. We all do, right? It's all about humanity coming together. Civilization is founded upon this principle. Some people say, like archaeologists and prehistorians, say that civilization was founded because of trade. It's not because of warfare, like, okay, we get your tribe and my tribe together, now we have twice as many people to fight off predators and to fight off other tribes. No, not like that. It's because of cooperation, togetherness, and unity. If we put your tribe and my tribe together, we have twice as many things to trade. The interconnection of trade and the interconnection of humanity working together for constructive issues, not warfare, which is destructive. Construction is what pushes a civilization forward. And it's sort of like, we will never achieve that level of togetherness and unity and prosperity if we're going to be talking about partisanship. Republicans good, Democrats bad, Democrats good, Republicans bad. That is just almost like a political fiction. That is almost just like divide and conquer things that are used by the political elites and the establishment. On this channel, we've been somewhat open to the theory that the Senate is actually the buffer zone in between the political establishment, like the political elite circles, and the voices of the people. The House of Representatives are the people that represent the districts, the constituents, and the Senate is the more prestigious one. Like, absolutely, there is more prestige in being a senator than being a member of the House of Representatives. That one I completely agree with. Maybe because there are fewer of them, maybe just people think it's more difficult to achieve, or maybe there's some genuine truth and that the Senate is the buffer zone in between the political establishment and the voices of the people. But, that's a little bit more, it's kind of just an observation that someone made on a different channel that we've been talking about a few times here. Okay, though, so where does that leave us? Which way do we go forward? Well, first and foremost, we all know that humanity is meant to come together. And these sort of nonsensical conversations that people are having about social issues, like let's form an ethno-state, or let's maybe build a wall or something like that. I mean, Donald Trump's whole thing about building the wall it's purely just divisiveness. You know that, and I know that. It's like the Democrats authored a bill for $46 billion of border security to do all sorts of tactics to reinforce the border. Border security is mostly a bipartisan issue. It was before Donald Trump, but you see the mechanics of hyper-partisanship now turned into the possibility of decriminalizing border crossings. I mean, yes, of course, people can claim economic asylum at any time, even if they are undocumented, but we also have to bear in mind that national security is something. Securing a border is a very important issue, and it's a very real issue. But the Democrats did that. Who was the one behind that? Senator Michael Bennet, one of the other candidates that is running for president, that hasn't had a lot of coverage yet, or recently, rather. I mean, he was on the debate stage for a while, but he also slipped into the shadows. $46 billion for border security, more than what Donald Trump was asking for during that government shutdown. So you see that Democrats care about border security, and that should also be a bipartisan issue. And what the Trump administration didn't foresee is, it's not that they didn't foresee it, they didn't care about it. You will never get an answer to something like border security coming at it from a partisan standpoint. That's what the thesis of this book could easily be applied to. You will never get an answer to that if you're coming at it from a partisan standpoint. They turn border security into something so hyper-partisan that people are now like, no, we don't want any border security at all. Let's just kind of like open the gates. And, I mean, people are talking about that, and I was being a little bit, what would you say, like, whimsical there for a second. But really, they're now talking about we just need to decriminalize border crossings. Why are they saying that? Is it because Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren actually want to decriminalize border crossings? Is it because they actually care? I don't believe that. Because when I see a politician, I see a politician. And I believe the reason why they're promoting that is because Donald Trump wanted to build the wall. Hyper-partisanship. Hyper-partisanship. Absolutely. Absolutely, I would promote that. It's nothing against Bernie or Warren. In fact, I think Bernie Sanders is an excellent political personality. If you can tell by the tone of the way things are going here, I don't agree with him on everything. I don't think that everything he says is perfect. But I think he's an excellent political personality, and you should too. You want to know why? Because look how Bernie has mobilized such a large wing of the Democratic Party. Look how Bernie has connected with such a large wing of the Democratic Party. Is that not what the politicians are supposed to be doing? He is a good political personality, and he's also not one of those politicians like Ted Cruz, for example, would be an example of a bad political personality. People will vote for Ted Cruz. He'll increase his own power. That's what he wants. But everybody hates him. Everybody hates Ted Cruz. And even the Republicans that vote for Ted Cruz, they hate Ted Cruz. They just think he's useful. And at some deep level of inner consciousness, we all know that. We all know that. They just like, oh, he's like a slimy, ladder-climbing, conniving politician, but we'll vote for him. Sorry, Beto. But at the same time, though, we're going to have to just be aware, though, that the political conversation can go so much further. It can get to the point where we're just going to have to be like, both sides of the aisle are meant to work together. We all have this type of understanding. It is built up in our foundational principles of culture that we're supposed to interact with other people. Excessive tribalism has never cured anything. If it had, then we wouldn't have had the civilizations to begin with. Think about it. It's just like if the tribes had never unified into anything, then we wouldn't have had the cities. It's like it's a foundational principle. It is a pure fundamental of how the civilization should be acting. So when you sort of want to introduce things like hyper-partisanship into border security and into healthcare and into perhaps the way we kind of do things like government spending and such, no matter what political issue you would like to talk about, if it becomes purely partisan, you will never get any sort of real conversations going. You will never get any practical legislation going, because it's not about putting in a good plan. It's not about putting in something that is very beneficial to everybody. It's not about succeeding at that point. It is only about having your side, whether it's Democrat or Republican, liberal, conservative, left-winger, right-winger, having that side winning. And I mentioned on the channel before that I'm a fan of Scott Adams, and he just said something that it is impossible to accept that 50% of Americans are wrong about everything all the time. And if that's the case, what is the point of playing the opposition card? If you know that 50% of Americans are not wrong about everything all the time, then you're just naysaying for the sake of naysaying. And not you personally. I love you. You are amazing. The hypothetical royal you, or whatever, I'm probably using that term incorrectly. If somebody's doing that, then it's not practical, and it's really not going to advance anything. So, let's just skip the Civil War, and let's unite. Let's just skip the Civil War, and embrace the sort of concept of one love, one humanity, one earth, one people, one freedom, just one everything. And do I really think that something like this, a little YouTube upload like this, is going to have an enormous amount of an impact on humanity? You know, it's very unlikely, but putting something out there like this is not to get 1 million views, which it won't. Putting something out there like this is just because I had way too much coffee this morning, and I thought I would sit down and read a book, and I read one page, and I was just like, holy crap, you know, that's that thing where you can't stay silent about something, and you're just like, oh, wait a second. But no, in the Democratic primary, as you see, I do love Marianne Williamson. I like that John Delaney has said a lot about unity. Tim Ryan was supposed to be talking about unity, but that didn't sell for him, so he tried to revamp his campaign about promoting the Rust Belt. And we got to look at the front runners. So I said that I like Bernie's personality, but Elizabeth Warren might go up and down in the polls. I don't think Joe Biden is going to win the nomination. Kamala Harris kind of really tanked, and it's just a giant question mark whether or not she can rebound. I don't like her as a person. I don't like her as a personality. I don't like her as a public speaker, but other people seem to have a connection with her. Pete Buttigieg almost is just too inexperienced to actually win the nomination, but let's just see what happens, and let's see. Maybe I'll look back at this in 8 years and be like, holy crap, about who actually won. That's all for me now. Love.